I was a police officer for 31 years up in Santa Barbara, and I worked several different assignments, but most of the time I worked major crimes, which was homicide, robberies, stabbings, sexual assaults, and very serious crimes. I also worked patrol, and I did a short stint as a motorcycle officer towards the end of my career. And what motivated me to write this book was, as a cop, people don't realize, I think sometimes, just the impact that first responders go through dealing with trauma and the calls that they go on a daily basis. And for me, I was not a believer for the first 20 years of my career. And I handled that probably the wrong way when I was trying to deal with the stresses that job can put on people, because cops and firefighters and first responders, they respond to things that most people will never ever experience, nor would you want them to do that. I think some days I was out there asking myself why I'm doing this job, and it was because I didn't want somebody else to have to do what I was doing at that very moment. But as I went through my career, I always saw that no matter how bad a situation, there was always something positive. There was always something good and strong that would always keep me coming back. I didn't know what that was or recognize it at that time, but it was God's grace, and it was watching Him work through these situations that was just amazing. You could see a victim just stand up and have strength beyond what somebody could imagine, or a community come together to help people in their time of need. So I experienced a lot as a law enforcement officer. I had some big crimes, some major investigations that I write about in the book. And then I talk about the impacts that first responders go through doing that job.
And I want you to share now about, and obviously, as you mentioned, you were involved in some major cases, and I can imagine that this is the type of work that would really wear on a person. So you were at a point, as I understand it, in your life where things were on a downward trajectory. And
Yes.
God intervened in your life in a powerful way. Share about that, if you would, please.
He did. I was in a place where there wasn't a whole lot of hope. My youngest son, one of the biggest things that happened in my life was my youngest son got diagnosed with bone cancer when he was 12 years old. And at that time, I didn't know the Lord. A lot of people would say, hey, you might want to consider a relationship with Jesus and the comfort that He has to offer. And at that time, it was something that I just filed away, but I couldn't really understand the situation. I didn't know what was happening. But that just compiled with the things that I had gone through as a cop and how I dealt with things. I chased the comforts of the world to ease my burdens, and I came to a point where now I had lost 2 marriages as a cop. I had my youngest son was dying of cancer, and my older son had gotten involved in a drug addiction. So I was in a place where there was, for me at that point, just looking around, I didn't see a whole lot of hope, or I didn't have, there wasn't a light for me to really look at until I met my current wife, and she took me to a Christian worship concert up at Santa Barbara County Bowl. It was our first date. I didn't know what I was getting into, but it was there that the pastor came out in the middle of the concert and spoke. And when he talked about what God has to offer and the comfort and just the ability to put our burdens down, and he was just speaking to me, and God used that man to speak into my heart that night. And it was so impactful that I was looking around at 5,000 people going, wow, how does this guy know my story? So the very next day, my cousin, who is a police officer up in Santa Barbara, he's a lieutenant there now. He'd been praying for me. He'd been a believer, and he'd been praying for me all along through all of my trials. And I came to him and I said, Dan, would you tell me about Jesus? And that was the turning moment for me, because it all began to make sense for me, and my faith started that day, and I gave my life to the Lord.